Lewis's eyes were blinded by the sharp golden sunlight, which was direct because of his window to the bed frame. Janet pulled the curtains, kissed his 5-year-old boy on the forehead, and asked him, "So, did you decide what we should bake today?" Lewis had the brightest smile and gave his mother a big nod. Janet and Lewis went to the kitchen and took out all the ingredients to bake blueberry muffins at Lewis's request. The kitchen was covered in flour and sugar. Lewis whipped the batter and splattered it across the floor and counter. But Janet didn't frown or worry about having to clean the mess. She was happy to see the twinkle and joy on his face. Baking every Sunday has been a ritual in Langley's household. Since John Langley abandoned his wife and only child, Janet had to be the mother and father to this child. She worked through the week, maintaining and juggling between 2 jobs to cater to her child with the best possible life she could. Because of her tight and demanding schedule, it was almost impossible for her to spend time with her son. However, Janet always made sure to feed her son and have dinner with him every single day. To her, no expression was more significant than to provide for your loved one. Despite her mother's best efforts, Lewis always felt the void his father had left. Janet poured all her love and attended to Lewis on the weekend. They both engrossed themselves in fun activities. After baking golden loaves of bread and muffins, they would clean up the kitchen together and tend to their small garden in the backyard. The yard was little, but adored and cared for. Janet would teach Lewis all about seeding and planting a life. She always said, "A fruit or vegetable is a literal product of your patience, my child." They had a small patch of tomatoes. Lewis was very close to his mother. He would tell her all about his dreams at night and his plans in the daylight. Janet would listen to all his senseless nonsense all day long. At dinner, she would ensure to dish out food creatively. She would serve rice by making a white heap and placing small chicken pieces on it. Lewis looked forward to eating his dinner every day. Sunday was a day his son always looked forward to because he had his mother's undivided attention. The time didn't stop. Lewis was now 13 years old. Janet had to work twice as hard to fulfill her son's growing needs and necessities. She worked more than 10 hours a day, resulting in a slight overlook, and she couldn't follow her Sunday routine. Lewis often asked his mother, "Mom, why do you work so much?" Janet would kiss her son's forehead and reply, "To give you the best life, my sweetheart." Lewis was upset because most of the day he was alone in the house and had no one to talk to. He only had his mother and missed her. He decided not to speak to his mother the entire weekend. It was Sunday, and Janet planned to bake a pie with her son. Lewis dismissed her mom and overslept because he was still upset with her. Janet felt a little guilty for ignoring him, but she had no choice. She cooked his favorite meal, red sauce pasta with mashed potatoes, for dinner. This was her way of saying sorry to him. Janet called Lewis for dinner, and he answered, "I am tired of eating at home. We never go out for dinner." Lewis went to his room and said, "I am not hungry, Mother." That night, Janet didn't have any dinner as well. The following day, Janet woke up early before Lewis woke up for school and reheated the pasta for him. She packed it for his lunch and dished out his breakfast like every morning. She woke Lewis from a deep sleep with a kiss on his head and sent him off to school, and she left for work as well. Things were going well between mother and son. Lewis understood his mother's difficult position. "I'll try my best to spend all my time with you on weekends," Janet promised her son, who smiled brightly. "Mom, we can watch my favorite movie and bake chocolate chip cookies," Lewis suggested and hugged his mother. As a single mother, Janet never had time for her social life. Her work friends always invited her to dinners, but she always declined them. She always had dinner with Lewis, every day. It had been a long time since John left Janet. Many men were interested in taking Janet out for a date, and truthfully, Janet was interested too. She wanted to rekindle the romance in her life, but she always had too much work or couldn't spare a small quarter of attention to someone other than her son. On June 18th, Janet came early from work and went to the Adidas store to buy an overpriced pair of sneakers for his son's birthday. This was the 3 months of saving that she had spent. Since Lewis's classmate walked through the school corridors wearing them, he raved about it to Janet. "Those sneakers are so cool! Bob told me they are super comfortable too. One day when I have enough money, I'm going to buy those for myself." Janet remembered her son's words and started saving for the shoes. She skipped her lunch at work a few days a week to save money. She also didn't mind overusing the same pair of sandals and worn-out, faded jeans. On Lewis's birthday, she picked up dinner on her way home to treat Lewis to fast food. Janet could not contain her happiness the entire way home because she knew her son would be so happy. She opened the door and wished her son a happy birthday, only to be received by dead silence. Lewis was not home. She found a note on the table that read, "Celebrating with friends. Don't wait for me at dinner. Janet placed his gift on his bed with a happy birthday card. This was the first time Janet had her dinner alone after a very long time. Louis started ignoring his mother's presence more and more because he knew she would be there whenever he needed her. Louis used to stay with his friends almost the entire week and partied with them all night. At one time, Louis came home at midnight on a school night. Janet was furious and scolded him for being so irresponsible and careless. She screamed at him, "Do you realize what time it is?" Janet lashed out at him only because his son was in bad company. "You left a note for me. I will not put up with your nonsense behavior. Fix your attitude," she instructed her son. But to her surprise, Louis screamed back at her, "I am not a kid anymore who wants his plate to be decorated colorfully. I am 18, Mom." His words scared her. With watery eyes, she went back to her room. Meanwhile, Louis slammed his room door. Janet finally admitted that she no longer had anyone to share dinner with. Sometimes she did not eat at all, and on days when Louis would have dinner with her, he was occupied with keeping track of his friends on social media. Janet would try to ignite the conversation by asking him about his school friends. Still, she never received an answer longer than 3 words. Louis was turning 19 this year, and he and Janet were no longer close. There were no baking Sundays, and Louis never shared anything about his day. Even if asked, he would reply, "Everything's fine," or "I am meeting up with some friends. Don't wait for me at dinner." Janet was almost 40 and could have used a friend at this age to avert her loneliness. She never involved herself in any romantic relationship throughout her 20s and 30s, and now wishes for someone to be there for her as well. Her entire life, she made people feel at home in herself. Deep down, she craved to feel at home with someone. Janet still cooked dinner for 2 every day and always dished out a plate colorfully and kept it on the table for Louis. She would eat her dinner alone every day at 8:30 p.m. and would retire to bed early after taking her diabetes medication. Janet would wake up early and first go to the dining table to see if her son had eaten dinner. The plate would almost be packed and gone cold by the morning, signaling to her that her son hadn't touched the plate. Louis left a note on the table for her mother, which said, "Heading out early today. Have a big day ahead." Louis was excelling in his career. He was in a great position in a multinational company, working as a company marketer. Langley's financial condition no longer required Janet to work overtime and accumulate 3 months of tips to make a new purchase. Janet engaged herself in different activities to conquer her loneliness. Still, nothing ever cured the longing she felt for her only son. It was August 11th, Janet's birthday, and she hoped that Louis would have remembered and wished for her. But all he left her was a note. Louis had scheduled a reminder on his cell phone for today's meeting. It was not until late at noon that he remembered it was her mom's birthday. He had not prepared anything, nor wished her in the morning. He felt terrible, but he knew his mother would understand. Louis came home at 10 with a full stomach. He looked around. Everything looked the same and tidy, and her mother's bedroom lights were out. He glanced at the dining table and found it empty. He immediately knew something was off. "How come Mom has not put a dinner plate for me today?" Louis asked himself in surprise. His mother had always prepared fresh dinner for him and dished it out beautifully on a plate for the past 26 years. He went to Janet's room and found her unconscious by the side of her bed. Louis went pale and experienced vibration. With his sweaty palms, he tried to wake her up and cried out, "Mom!" Without wasting another fraction of a second, he took her to the hospital. Louis's head was now resting against the cold wall of the hospital waiting room. He couldn't help but think about all the times which led to this day. He barely exchanged words with her mother in the past 6 months during the pursuit of his career. He failed to notice that his mother was growing thin and weak. She needed him to look after her as she did for the past 25 years. Louis couldn't hold it anymore. The tears rolled out of his eyes, leaving a trail over his cheeks. Louis saw the doctor leaving his mother's room. He quickly got up and asked, "Doctor, is my mother going to be okay? Is she all right?" The doctor looked at Louis and replied, "Did you know your mother has been skipping meals? She has lost a lot of weight and her blood sugar levels dropped, which fainted her." The doctor explained Janet's condition to Louis, who couldn't help but weep at his negligence towards his mother. Louis was drowning in guilt because he knew his mother only had dinner when he was at the table too. He promised himself, "From this day onward, I will be there for my mom like she was there for me when Dad abandoned us. I'll never ignore her." Louis prepared blueberry muffins following her mother's recipe, like they used to, and vegetable and chicken soup. He packed the food for his mother and went straight to the hospital. He kissed his mother's forehead to wake her up and fed her soup. Louis talked about his job and told about the girl he had been going out with and how he would soon propose to her. This time they exchanged more than 3 words and shared food as they used to at the dining table. Janet was finally discharged and was happy to have her son back in her life. On Sunday, they went to their backyard to check on their small tomato patch, which had been neglected for the past few years. Louis pulled out all the gunk and rotten stems, and Janet planted new seeds in the patch. Louis baked delicious golden bread while her mother arranged his plate with smiley whipped cream. At noon, Janet returned to her room for a short nap, found a fresh pair of jeans, and found the plushest and cozy slippers, the kind she longed for when working 2 jobs, and her feet were covered with calluses. She went to her son with teary eyes and hugged him. "Louis, thank you for the gift, my child." Louis kissed her mom's forehead and replied, "This is the least I could do for you, Mom. I can never repay all the sacrifices that you have made for me." Janet was so touched that his son remembered all the sacrifices she made to provide him with everything. The son hugged her mother and said, "Thank you for loving me every day." Soon their dinner table had a new addition. Riley, Louis's lovely fiancé, enjoyed and engaged in Langley's Sunday baking ritual. Janet no longer felt alone, and Louis finally realized that no one would ever dish a dinner plate for him as his mother did.
Charlotte reached the office late, and her table was already full of many files to go through. She was elegantly dressed in a 3-piece brown suit, and red lipstick made her face look younger and prettier. She was 36 years old and owned a steadily growing business. Her parents passed away 2 years ago, and she separated from her toxic husband just a year ago. Since then, she has lived alone and has been single. She did not think about getting married again because of her traumatic experience. As Charlotte was skimming through the files, her intercom rang. "Hello, ma'am. A contractor named Mr. Henry is here from XYZ Company." Charlotte told the secretary to let Henry come into her office. Henry was 45 but looked energetic and full of life. As he entered the room, Charlotte greeted him with a smile. "Welcome, Mr. Henry. I have been waiting for you for quite some days." Henry greeted them and settled himself on the chair in front of her. As they talked about business affairs, Henry looked interested in her. Charlotte could also feel his gestures, but did not hurry to move things on. At the end of the meeting, they planned to meet the next day and settle the agreement terms of their contract. As Henry was about to leave, he asked Charlotte, "Why do you live alone? Why don't you get a partner?" Charlotte was not expecting this question. However, she cleared her throat and said, "I have not found the right person yet." To this, Henry chuckled softly and said, "Then I should consider myself a potential candidate to find a place in your heart." Without waiting for Charlotte to reply, he went away. The next day, Charlotte waited for Henry unconsciously. She liked his charismatic personality and could see a good business partnership with him. Henry arrived 10 minutes late from the scheduled time. This was his trick to further lure Charlotte into his spell, which worked quite well. Charlotte asked her secretary whether Henry had arrived yet thrice. As soon as he arrived, he presented his business terms and conditions, which Charlotte signed immediately without giving due attention to the details. As per hopes of Charlotte, Henry asked him out to dine together that night, and Charlotte accepted this offer willingly. It was not a usual business meeting because Charlotte sensed something interpersonal in Henry's attitude. That night, Charlotte dressed elegantly and she looked graceful. Likewise, Henry was looking presentable. They both spent many hours together. During their meetup, Charlotte asked Henry about his family. He lied to her. He told her he separated from his wife about 6 months ago and is now looking for a life partner. Charlotte wanted to know the reason behind the divorce, but changed the topic. He switched their conversation to business and other things. Charlotte was satisfied with Henry's answers, and she was planning to accept his proposal soon. Henry and Charlotte began to meet frequently, but Charlotte would pay the bills and manage their luxurious trips. A few times, Henry asked her for some financial favors on the pretext of having hard times in business, and Charlotte helped her instantly all the time. Henry retained an upper hand over Charlotte in all meetups and used his masculinity to keep Charlotte under control. Charlotte was not suspicious of Henry, despite seeing most things going against her. As Charlotte's past relationship was mostly violent, she appreciated Henry for not being violent, but Henry did more harm to her by staying exploitative and manipulative. One day, Henry's phone was curiously switched off for 12 hours. When he was finally reachable, he told her he was away on a business trip and would return in a week. Henry ghosted her for the entire week because he was on a family trip with his wife and 3 grown-up kids. Charlotte was not the first woman he played with. Instead, it was Henry's hobby to lure beautiful women into his love trap and then receive favors from them. Charlotte was not naive, but her feelings blinded her. After passing through a past traumatic relationship, she hoped to see something good with her new relationship. Financially, she was stable, but her emotional baggage cost her a lot. She was falling into yet another emotional trap in the quest to find peace and stability of a healthy relationship. Charlotte passed that week under great stress. She could not concentrate on her work, and her physical health deteriorated. When Henry finally contacted her the following Monday, he urged her to meet him at his office. When she went there, she could see eyes staring at her suspiciously. She asked Henry, "Why is your staff staring at me?" He leaned forward on the table and told her they doubted him for having an affair with her. She exclaimed in shock, "So you aren't in a relationship with me?" Henry justified himself. I am, but I cannot tell everyone. I have a family." Within a second, he spoke the truth himself. Charlotte was left speechless. She had just begun to believe in the beauty of relationships again when Henry took away trust from her. She, however, remained composed and asked him, "So who is your family? I remember you told me you are single and you have no family." Henry pleaded, "If I had told you that I am married, you would never agree to develop a relationship with me." Charlotte rose from her seat and rushed out of his office. She came back to her office and canceled her business contract with Henry. He called her several times, but to no avail. His texts and calls fell on dumb ears. When his requests did not work, he resorted to threats and abuses. But Charlotte had already experienced toxic relationships, so none of this intimidated her. She took some time off from her business and took a short vacation in another city. Sitting in a cafe, she saw Henry with his wife and 3 kids. They looked like a happy family. Although Henry had ditched her, she did not want to ruin his comfortable life. She had a great chance to humiliate and disturb his life, but she chose not to do so. Her intuition told her that the time was not right to do so because he had no proof to explain to his wife their relationship. She returned earlier from the trip and spent the rest of her days at home. Henry contacted him again, and this time with a legal notice. He was trying to persuade Charlotte to carry on their affair under the table. Still, Charlotte was persistent in not wanting a relationship that looked more like a hidden activity. When she finally rejoined her office, Henry was waiting for her in her office. Till now, Henry believed that she did not know that he had kids, so he set another trap. "See, I know I lied to you. I should have told you I am married, but I didn't. I want kids. That is why I want to marry again." Charlotte laughed at this trap because she had already seen his 3 kids with him and his wife. "So who was with you at Barcelona's cafe last Sunday? Were they your neighbor's kids?" Charlotte asked with crafted innocence. Henry now had no other option but to spill out the actual truth. "Your business is flourishing, so I need a partnership with you. I presume that being in a relationship will make business deals easier," Henry said in a reserved tone. Charlotte called in her guard and asked Henry to leave with a notice that he should never dare to break into her place again. Having kept herself quiet for so long, she was not in the mood to forgive Henry this time. She called in her lawyer and discussed her case with him. The next day, Henry was called before the judge as Charlotte had accused him of harassment and business theft. All the expensive gifts that Henry had lured Charlotte to give him were recovered, and Henry was fined for the case of harassment. Henry got paid back for what he invested in the relationship, and Charlotte luckily saved herself from another toxic cycle in her life. The drama was not over yet, as Henry's wife approached Charlotte and asked her about her relationship with him. Charlotte told him about her natural face, Henry. Henry's wife told her that Henry used to trap successful ladies in his relationship and then enjoyed the perks of their wealth, and he owned only a small business. Charlotte did not listen to her more and asked Henry's wife not to follow her again. She closed her chapter with Henry forever. Exposure to Henry's evil ways of doing things became public, significantly impacting his personality. He slowly alienated himself from the company of ladies and began spending more time with family. On the other hand, Charlotte was still looking for a good life partner. One day, a perfect match came for her. The man was of her age and genuinely single. She was ready to marry him, and on her wedding day she received an anonymous note. "Dear Charlotte, I know I cheated on you and lied to you, but I cannot agree more with the fact that you are a good woman. You had all the options to ruin my life, but you taught me only what I deserved. You told me the importance of family and the need for honesty in relationships. I hope you move towards a better life and wish you a happy wedding. May you both stay together and stay happily ever after." No name was at the end of the letter, but Charlotte knew that the sender certainly was Henry. She was happy that she was not wrong in someone's story. The marriage ceremony began, and everyone cheered up. On that day, no one was happier than Charlotte herself. Charlotte's marriage proved successful, and her dream of a happy family came true. Charlotte and her husband were a carbon copy of each other. Their compatibility made their relationship a healthy one. At that time, her ex-husband, who had abused her for 5 years, also contacted her and tried to set a trap of having her back. However, Charlotte's husband was so loving and caring that no negative influence could harm Charlotte. They merged their businesses, developed new hobbies, and began participating in community work. Their couple became one of the most famous in their town, mainly because of the love and support they both gave each other. Charlotte often reflected that the people who passed through the most challenging times deserve to see happiness and goodness one day. She remained stuck in an abusive relationship for 5 years. Afterward, another infatuation kept her lingering for a year, and only at 38 did she find her perfect match. She often said to her husband that finding beautiful things needs patience. Sitting beside her husband, she exclaimed with relief, "I wanted nothing more but this peace, and at last I have it." Her husband cuddled her, watching the sunset in the west. In the end, the beauty of a relationship is like a soft breeze that relaxes one's body and sets the soul free to enjoy the pleasures of life. Finding the perfect match is hard, but settling for less than perfect often makes a person suffer unjustly. Charlotte waited for years to eventually find the person with whom she could connect openly, but she had to overcome several hurdles to reach him. It was a cold winter night when Ellis and her parents were driving home from her school play. She loved wintertime, especially at Christmas time. The smell of cinnamon, the sight of 1,000 lights everywhere she looked, and the sound of Christmas carols. Her favorite thing, however, was decorating the house with her parents. Ellis was very excited because it was Christmas Eve the following day, and she could not wait to decorate the tree with her father and prepare dinner with her mother. As they drove home, Christmas songs were playing on the radio, and her parents sang along. Her mom turned around and gave Ellis a big smile, telling her to sing with them. The three, singing and having a good time, were cheerful in the car. Suddenly, the car started sliding on the road, and Dad tried to hold the wheel under control. He did not see the ice on the street because it was covered with fresh snow. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. He lost control of the wheel, and everything happened fast. Ellis was in shock, unable to move or scream. She just sat there, watching the car smash into a pole. Then, it all went dark. Snow was still falling gently on the ground when she opened her eyes. She felt something warm on her forehead, and as she touched it, she felt blood. Still in shock, Ellis got out of the car. There was broken glass everywhere, snow red from blood. The streetlight above her head blinked. Then she remembered. Mom, Dad. She crawled to the front of the car and tried to open the passenger door. However, she could not. The car was heavily damaged, and the more she tried to get her parents, the weaker she felt. And that was the last thing she remembered before waking up at the hospital. I am very sorry for your loss. These are the words she heard when she asked about her parents. How? Both of them? Alice was in tears, hoping this was all just a bad dream. But it wasn't. On that cold winter night, she lost both of her parents. Unsure of what will happen next, Alice felt alone and scared. An unfamiliar face appeared in her room as she lay in her bed. "Hi, Alice. I know you do not remember me since you were just a baby when I last saw you. My name is Maggie, and I am your mother's sister. I know you would prefer to live with your grandparents, but it was your parents' last will that you come to live with me." Unsure what to feel about that or what to say, Alice started crying again as she slowly realized she would never see her parents again. At that point, she did not care about anything. She did not watch where or with who she would live with, so she just nodded to her aunt and went back to sleep. The following day, she was discharged from the hospital, since she only had a few stitches on her forehead and a couple of bruises on her arms. "I packed most of your stuff and brought it to my house. I thought you would prefer it that way," Maggie said to Alice. "But we can stop at your house if you like." Alice remembered her father bringing all the Christmas decorations down from the attic and putting them in the middle of their living room. She remembered her mom laughing as she almost tripped over the boxes. She remembered how excited she was that day, knowing that Christmas was just around the corner. So no, she did not want to go to their house at the moment because there were just too many memories there. After about an hour of driving, Maggie stopped in front of a big yellow house. "Here we are," she said as she opened Alice's door. It was a lovely house with big windows and a huge backyard. "I hope you will like it here," her aunt said as they walked toward the front gate. The inside of the house was quite lovely, but so different than her house. Everything was so clean and tidy, sterile almost. "I have to go to work now," said Maggie. "I have a 12-hour shift, so I won't be back before midnight. If you want to order in, there is food in the fridge and some money on the table." Alice was surprised to hear that it was Christmas Eve after all. However, she remembered her aunt told her she was a nurse at the local hospital, so it made sense she had to work crazy hours. "But it is Christmas Eve, and I don't want to be alone," Alice said. "This was always a special day for my family. We cooked dinner and decorated the house together." Her aunt looked at her and told her that she does not celebrate Christmas, so it is just an ordinary day for her. She had no Christmas decorations and no Christmas tree. After Maggie left, Alice went to her room and started crying. She could not believe what was happening and was heartbroken that she would spend her favorite holiday alone. She was only 12 years old, and her entire world collapsed. This was supposed to be a happy day, filled with joy and laughter, Christmas songs and celebration. Instead, she was all alone in this big, empty house. Her eyes suddenly felt heavy, and she slowly fell asleep. When she woke up, it was already dark outside, and her growling stomach reminded her it was time to eat something. But she was eager to explore the rest of the house, so Alice decided to walk around the house instead of getting something to eat. Her room was on the first floor, so she decided to see what else was on that floor. Next to her room was a bathroom with a big bathtub. There were 3 more bedrooms down the hall, and Alice kept wondering why one person would need such a big house with so many empty bedrooms. There was one more door at the end of the hall, and she was sure this was just another bedroom. Alice opened the door, and she could not believe her eyes when she saw what was behind them. There was a giant Christmas tree in the corner. The tree was all covered in dust, but it looked magical. A dozen boxes were in the other corner, all with Christmas decorations, different colors, shapes, and sizes. Hundreds of little Christmas lights were on the shelf next to her, and another batch in a box across the room. For a moment, she just stood there, completely confused. Alice could not understand why her aunt would lie. Why would she tell her that she does not celebrate Christmas, but has a whole room filled with Christmas decorations? And in a blink of an eye, she decided to still make the best out of this terrible situation. Box by box, she carried it all down the stairs and into the living room. The tree was the biggest challenge, but she was determined to carry it down. It took her a while before everything was moved from that secret room. However, Alice was excited to start decorating finally. She put up the tree and started thinking about which decorations she would choose. She decided to go with red and blue since these were her parents' favorite colors. After she was almost done decorating the tree, Alice saw something shiny at the bottom of the box. She looked inside and could not believe her eyes when she saw two small angels. That is when she knew it was a sign. She was going to be okay. Her parents will always watch over her, and she will honor their memory every Christmas Eve by following their tradition. It was almost midnight when she finished decorating. Suddenly, the house did not feel that big and cold anymore. Lights were blinking in every room, the tree looked magnificent, and she even decorated the fireplace with Christmas socks for her and her aunt. Exhausted but content, Ella sat down and just tried to enjoy some Christmas spirit. But little did she know what would happen when Maggie came home. Shock, anger, disbelief. Maggie was furious when she opened the front door of her house. Trying to hold back her emotions, she looked at Alice and asked her why she would do something like that. "I told you I don't celebrate Christmas, and I don't decorate my house. Everything in that room was there for a reason. I never permitted you to go lurking around the house to invade my privacy like that. I took you in because my sister wanted me to, but maybe this was a mistake. Maybe it would be better for you to live somewhere else," Maggie said with tears in her eyes. Alice was heartbroken. She felt like she keeps losing everything and everyone. She was trying to make this Christmas Eve bearable. Drowning in her grief, Alice collapsed in the middle of the living room. When she came to, Maggie was sitting right beside her. Her face was covered in tears, and Alice told her she was sorry for doing what she did. Her only wish was to feel close to her parents, and following their tradition was a way to do just that. Maggie's voice was trembling when she started telling her story. "It was 10 years ago, Christmas Eve. My husband and I just bought this house. We wanted a big family, 5 or 6 children, so it made sense to buy a big house. I was 8 months pregnant, and we were expecting a little boy. We could not be happier, and we were excited to spend that Christmas Eve together, since we knew that there would already be 3 of us next year. We decided to do some last-minute shopping because you and your parents were arriving the next day. I have loved you since you were born, and I am proud to be your aunt. I still don't remember much from that evening. I remember a bright light coming at us very fast, and then everything went dark. I woke up at the hospital, only to find out my baby boy and my husband didn't make it. I was devastated and lost in my grief for a very long time. I pulled away from everybody, including you and your parents. As time passed, I started to get used to my loneliness, and it became my way of life. Since the accident, I have never celebrated Christmas again. It was too painful. So when I came home tonight and saw what you did, all that grief came crashing again. But I understand now. We are together in this grief. We both lost those closest to us. And maybe this is the reason your mother wanted you to stay with me in case something happens to her, because she knew we would be united in our grief. So I am very sorry for my reaction, and I am very sorry for leaving you alone tonight." Alice was in tears listening to her aunt's story. She realized Maggie was right. Even in her last wish, her mom knew exactly what to do. Grateful to her aunt for sharing the story, Alice leaned over and gave Maggie a big hug. "Thank you for reminding me that Christmas is all about hope, new hope. As we begin our journey together, let us promise each other that we will continue your family's tradition and celebrate every Christmas Eve together, with the tree, decorations, Christmas songs, and dinner," Maggie said softly. United in their grief, Alice and Maggie spent the night sitting in front of the fireplace, slowly sipping their hot cocoa and sharing stories about their loved ones. It was a magical evening, uniting two broken souls in their sorrow. As Maggie looked at her niece, she felt something she had not thought about for a long time. hope. Oscar was a reticent boy and was often teased at school, mostly because of the fact that he looked like a girl. He had pretty facial features, tenderness, calmness of voice, compliance, eternal anxiety, and this was what Oscar hated in himself. He lived in a small town where almost everyone knew everything about each other. There was a deep forest nearby, through which he often went to school, avoiding the school bus. He didn't like buses because of the bullies, and he dreamed of his own skateboard. The people in town did not like the Oscar's family either. It was all because of his father, who was an obsessive kleptomaniac. He would steal people's wallets, food, and even small furniture from their houses. Also, he was an alcoholic, because of which he would often involve in fights. Many teachers compared Oscar to his father, although he was completely different. Students in school would often call him names and set him up, throwing things at him. His clumsiness, modesty, and old shabby clothes were the topics for their ridicules. Long and lean body, red hair, freckles, and black eyes exacerbated the situation. His classmates would laugh at him, calling him a tiny red rat. Over time, Oscar himself began to feel like a rat, as if imitating the habits of this animal. He even became interested in biology and zoology, which described the behavior of various animals. A lowered look and a quick, clumsy gait amused his peers. They would trip the boy, throw small stones and food at, tore his clothes, spat, and even punched him in the stomach sometimes. There was the main bully in school named Duke, who was the leader of the entire school, including Oscar's class. He was famous for having a lot of money and for being the son of a very influential person. His dad often defended his son, paying him off with cash. Humiliating and beating Oscar was Duke's daily job. The whole class, as if under hypnosis, obeyed their notorious leader. Every day, Oscar suffered another attack from a pack of wild hyenas. Yes, Oscar compared them to hyenas. A regular holiday for him was considered the day when he was humiliated just verbally, without usage of physical force. One day, Oscar stopped attending school after Duke and his gang tore his new shirt, which his mother had bought with the last of her money. And because of the numerous blows, his body was covered with bluish bruises. The house in which the boy lived was old, the roof often leaked during heavy rains, and some household appliances did not work at all. There was little food for them to eat, and because of it, his sister and Oscar were skinny. Oscar's family was dysfunctional. It consisted of a mother and his 4 younger sisters. His father committed suicide after he learned he would have a boy. His mom worked several jobs to provide for her daughters and for Oscar. All the boy's clothes were in patches, which his mother carefully sewed. But even these patches managed to be torn off by his daily enemies. Skipping his classes, Oscar loved to sit in the woods on the soft moss and read romance books. He always dreamed of a real-life relationship with a girl. No one would cut off his dreams on soft like a cloud of moss. But suddenly he heard a low, vile chuckle. Turning around, he saw Duke's gang heading towards him. Oscar realized that Duke had a shiny, sharp knife in his hand. He wanted to run away, but it was too late. They surrounded Oscar from all sides, leaving him no chance to escape. After tearing all his clothes off and his favorite book to shreds, they almost completed their crime, having made a deep, sharp cut on the right pale arm. They left completely naked Oscar alone in the darkening forest. The predators fled, uttering incomprehensible cries. Oscar was in terrible pain and not well physically at all. He wept bitterly. A weak, skinny boy whose body was like a wounded doe lay in a ball on the fluffy moss. Crimson blood flew endlessly from his paresis. He lay in the cold, covered with the remains of his torn clothes, and did not think of returning home. But the advancing twilight forced the boy to get up and leave the dark forest. Oscar's mother greeted him with hugs and cried loudly. He didn't have any more clothes for the next day. A patched blue shirt, thin trousers, black old worn shoes. That's all he had up to the moment. His mom got some clothes for him in a thrift store, but Oscar did not want to return to school, so later on, his mother decided to transfer him to homeschooling. Over time, Oscar became a grown-up, but his courage did not increase. He still remained gentle and fragile. In addition to everything, he feared visiting public places, as there was a high probability of meeting with Duke's gang. But Oscar never stopped dreaming about love. The guy worked part-time in the nearest library as a janitor. The saved money could be spent on his college education. He helped his sisters as much as possible, trying to bring the dwelling into a suitable condition. The grown-up guy tried to get acquainted with social networks, but all his attempts were in vain. One day, he received a message from a girl named Kelly. They began to communicate with a hint of a relationship. Over several months of their communication, their virtual friendship only grew stronger. Suddenly, there were some feelings sparkled between Oscar and Kelly. The emotions that overwhelmed Oscar were so strong that he decided to meet her in person. The city where Kelly lived was just as small as his, but the people in it were more balanced towards each other and didn't know Oscar. They met each other and soon they got married. They began to live together in a small house, which they rented with the money they earned. Oscar tried to make gifts, although they were not expensive, but the girl's eyes would light up even from them. This brought them some kind of exceptional emotional saturation in their relationship. Their love was reasonable and built on a solid friendship. She was his right hand in all aspects of their life. They knew each other's shortcomings and tried to deal with the difficulties along the way. Overcoming his fears, Oscar became stronger and stronger every day. From a skinny, clumsy boy, he grew into a stately, handsome one. Kelly was his true muse. Thanks to her, he found a good job and became self-confident. But some inner fears remained still. Oscar was afraid of guys and stout men who reminded him of the bully Duke. Kelly had the same personality as Oscar. She was gentle, shy, and fragile. At their first meeting, Oscar understood it and decided to start changing for good. Oscar would never stop to admire Kelly. She was a real example for him. Every time he would go crazy with her brown curly hair, smile, voice, and laughter. Even her sadness and mood swings seemed to Oscar as something native, beautiful. He supported and comforted her as much as he could. They complemented each other perfectly. Separately they were weak, but together they formed a whole universe. Kelly suggested getting a small tattoo in place of a scar from the sharp knife that Oscar received as a child. His new tattoo was sun-shaped, symbolizing a new bright stage in his life. Kelly dreamed of children, and Oscar hated them. From his school years, he had a trauma associated with his peers. He experienced a particular dislike for children, which later grew into a terrible phobia. Oscar was sure that he would be a bad example for children. He feared they would become as unhappy and weak as him. Kelly was already a mature girl with a good job and a house she bought with Oscar. She wanted to experience maternal feelings, but Oscar was categorically against it. She tried to convince him that he would be a good father, but Oscar did not want to accept it. Kelly and Oscar soon began to have disagreements because of the children. As a result, Oscar had a serious quarrel and decided to end their relationship with his lover. After separation, and due to the death of his mother, Oscar had to visit the city of his childhood. But now, he was no longer afraid to go out. He no longer hid in the forest as he did when he was a child. He even found out that the fates of those guys who bullied him in childhood were terrible. Duke's wealthy father was imprisoned for fraud, and the guy himself began abusing alcohol and drugs, leading to health problems and subsequent amputation of his limbs. Other classmates who also bullied Oscar under Duke's command lived very poorly. Their fate was typical. They got married, had many kids, and low-paying jobs. Their unfortunate lives were discussed in the small town. Oscar stopped being afraid of those guys. He even began to feel better than them. Indeed, he was handsome and self-sufficient. But now, his flaw was his endless sadness. He forgave the bully from childhood, but now he couldn't forget his love. Every day he would feel guilty about the quarrel that had happened with Kelly last time. Time passed, and he did not want to start a new relationship. Kelly was a goddess for him. He constantly thought only of her. He realized that he had acted foolishly. He was ready to change drastically and accept his foolishness, but he thought it might be too late, and his guilt might have brought the final verdict in their relationship. He didn't want to disturb Kelly, thinking she hated him. Suddenly, his phone rang. An unexpected call interrupted Oscar's sadness. It was Kelly on the phone. She began to sob bitterly, saying that she was ready to live with, even if it would cost her to live without having kids. Simultaneous thoughts reunited them. They were ready to trade for each other. Oscar now wanted to try being a father for Kelly's sake. They always felt each other as if some invisible thread connected them. Soon, Kelly became pregnant and gave birth to a boy, and a year later to another girl. After their children's birth, Oscar became even more fond of Kelly. He had solid fatherly feelings. He was ready to become more sociable for the sake of his children. And indeed, the love and care of both parents made it possible to raise healthy and intelligent children. Oscar felt warm and calm for the first time when he saw that his children began to make friends and actively communicate with each other. He often walked with his children and devoted all his free time to them. Although it was difficult for him to make it in society, he still tried to make their life happier and more colorful. Oscar began to communicate more with the children's fathers in school, went to football matches, and visited art galleries. That's how he started making friends. He was often complimented about his empathy, that he could understand almost any person to provide emotional support. His self-confidence grew each time. Soon, Oscar had a strong desire to communicate more and attend various events. As an adult man, Oscar understood he was a good father. He had a good, loving wife and worthy friends, and his past path was only an experience that helped him to understand himself and those around. She closed her eyes as she let the pain set in, trying fruitlessly to hold back the tears that threatened to fall from her face. She has to concentrate on not crying out loud as she remembers her late mother's words. Think of all the bright places, and you won't need to cry. She tried to think of ice cream, but was distracted by another heavy laugh from her cousin Ella, bringing her back to reality. This time, she lets the tears fall heavy. Her auntie's last sentence is something she never wants to hear again. She watched as Ella ran inside with glee, coming back with a bucket of cold water, always joyful to see her suffer. Her hatred for her started immediately after being introduced to the family as her cousin. Since then, she has promised to make her life a living hell. She hurriedly got up, shaking as her auntie ordered. She did not want to enact her anger further. She commanded to pour the water on her body. Ella smiled as she gladly obeyed her mother. This has become an everyday ritual, as she stopped flogging her, but has discovered other ways of reminding her how useless her life is with just words. She laid on the cold, bare floor for 30 minutes before she dragged her ragged self to the girls' room on the command of her auntie, crouched at her favorite position behind the door where she consoled herself. Ella came in and ignored her as she went to dress for school. With her head sunk between her knees, she hastily looks up at the sound of Ella telling her mum how beautiful and well-equipped her new school was. "And who do you expect to pack those clothes? You had better get up now before I descend on you again." She hurriedly brushed past her and began folding the clothes she washed yesterday. "You should be ashamed of yourself. Do you see your mate going to elementary school at this age?" She hissed and went inside. The tears on her face had dried up as she finished folding the clothes on the table. "My name is Jade Adams, the only daughter of Luke and Linda Adams. I am an orphan living with my auntie and cousin." These words are the first thing she learned how to spell and pronounce. She opened her wardrobe, and the fleet of mosquitoes seemed to be her enemy at that point. She vented her anger toward them by killing as much as possible and forgetting her sorrow. When the rest had managed to escape, she looked down at the rags she called clothes, all jumbled up and messy. She looked at Ella's side of the bed, tidy as always. Her auntie had rather beat her every day for her tardiness than teach her how to fold them. Having no idea what to wear, she poured all her clothes onto the floor, looking for something nice that could at least cover all the marks on her body. She went on with her morning duties of washing, scrubbing, and mopping the floor. It is not my fault that I am too old for elementary school, she thought within herself, after losing her parents at an early age. Life became a nightmare as she moved from one orphanage home to another. She sighed and sat down, leaning on the bed only Ella slept on. I once used to sleep on a bed like this before my parents died, she said. I wish they didn't travel, leaving me alone. Maybe if I had gone with them that fateful day, the death that took them away would have taken her too. Is it not better to die with them than to be alive and subjected to this mockery? Her father, Mr. Luke Adams, was one of the best painters in a small village in North Idaho. He was a good man who devoted his time to his work and family, trying everything possible to provide for his lovely young wife and their only child. She can still remember how her mother met her father, as they have told this story repeatedly. They attended the same community church and volunteered to help the needy in their community. When her father introduced her mother to his parents, it was unsurprising to both families as they had patiently waited for them to do so. The marriage was a small gathering where they invited close relatives of both families to rejoice with them. Life for the two lovebirds was a bed of roses as things were moving on fine. When Jade was born, her father promised to send her to the best school, as he was not privileged to live out his dreams. Maybe through why, he said, I can finally accomplish that. He then told her of his dream to become a neurosurgeon. She immediately promised him that she would help bring that dream to reality, since her dreams are also to become a neurosurgeon. The death of her parents later scattered those dreams. The driver was here. Her auntie screamed at Ella, "Finish your food in the next 5 minutes, or you are going to school with an empty stomach." As she began dishing food into her plate, she has been starving for the past 2 days because she mistakenly burnt her auntie's gown. She looked up to her auntie, expecting to see sympathy in her eyes. Maybe she would pity her and give her some food to sedate her rumbling stomach. She frowned as 2 slices of bread fell onto her plate. "You should be lucky I gave you something to eat, as I don't want you to die on us, because if you do, who will be cleaning and doing the house chores?" Before the death of her parents on her 5th birthday, she had wished for a long life, a beautiful house with 2 brothers and sisters. Maybe the wish fairies are sleeping, as she can't remember her wishes being granted. She went to the bedside shelf in the room. It contains most of her stuff, so she practically calls it her own. Ella hardly sleeps in the room with her. She prefers sleeping with her mom, but mostly comes to the room to dress up, or occasionally, when they are friends for a few seconds, chats with her. She pulled out the case containing her undies and brought out an old family album containing the pictures of her mom, her dad, and the life she once knew. She glanced through the photos, especially the one taken on her 5th birthday. With tears in her eyes, she promised to make them proud. As lonely as she was, she has this soothing feeling whenever she glances through the album, as she reminisces on the life she once had and thinks of the one she wishes to have. "Jade," her auntie called. As she hurriedly went to answer her, "You decided to keep me waiting." She shook her head vigorously. "No, Ma." She pointed to the chair beside her. "Wash these clothes and iron them very well. If you like, burn them. Ella and I are traveling tomorrow for an important occasion in New York. I need them thoroughly ironed." She hurriedly washed the clothes and spread them to dry. The following day, after her auntie and Ella left, she went over to Williams, as she could not wait to share the great news with him. Williams is an orphan like her, but unlike her, he is privileged because the family that adopted him is childless, so he is well taken care of. Williams has been her secret tutor since he found out that she has a passion for school and is always impressed by how an intelligent girl like her has been denied the privilege of going to school. She told him the news of her auntie traveling to New York with her daughter. Months ago, Williams helped her register for a scholarship program organized by his school for the less privileged children who can't afford primary education. The scholarship scheme covers from elementary education to the university stage. With the help of his mother, a high school teacher, William could narrow out the type of questions they would be asked during the exam, helping her master each question. She has been giving her very best, knowing fully well her future and the chance of her leaving the hellhole that faith has brought her solely depends on whether she succeeds. She became more focused and utilized every opportunity she got to practice and solve every quiz Williams gave her. Her auntie traveling for a few days gave her an edge over the situation as she fully dedicated time to study. On many occasions, Williams has asked her about the relationship between her and her auntie. She has not been able to give him any detailed information as to how she was related to her, because whenever she asked her auntie if it was her father or mother, she was told to, it always ends with silence, as her auntie has to refuse to explain to her who she was related to. All she could remember was being one day in the office of the Miss, the lady in charge of the third orphanage she was staying after the death of her parents. When she got to the office, she met her auntie, who claimed to be related to her, with a picture of her parents and her smiling happily. She hurriedly followed her, thinking that her life would change. She saw her parents smiling happily with her, but she never knew that she would be treated as though she was still in the orphanage. Jade kept counting every hour of the day until the competition day. Having prepared herself well, she prayed to God and reminded her guardian angel to help her succeed, as her future depended on her passing this scholarship exam. She had been consoling herself with the success story since Williams told her about the scholarship. She came to the exam venue in the company of Williams, who kept reminding her to have faith in herself, as he was very confident she would be among the selected candidates. A few months after she took the scholarship exam, life returned to how it was before. Her auntie continued with her behavior, and Ella was hers. Every day without hearing from the school, she keeps losing the small hope she has been holding on to. 8 months after the exam and a new academic session had begun, the school pasted the names of the selected candidates. Williams, on seeing her name boldly written as number 3, couldn't wait for the school to dismiss. He packed his books inside his bag at the sound of the bell and ran home as fast as his legs could carry him. With joy in his heart on seeing her, he screamed her name at the top of his voice. "Jade! Jade! Jade!" he screamed. She ran over to him, asking why he was running like something was after his life, getting closer to him. He saw the cheeky smile he was trying very hard to hide on his face, and immediately she knew that the scholarship result was out. "Did I get selected?" she asked him. "Yes," he answered, nodding his head. Hot tears rolled down her eyes immediately after he confirmed what she already knew in her heart. When Jade got home, she met staff from Williams' school, sent by the scholarship board, already discussing with her auntie. He came to inform Jade that she was among the selected candidates and will be joining them immediately. He apologized for the delay in pasting names and communicating with all the selected candidates. They had a hard time choosing the best candidate for the opportunity. He further explained what the scholarship program covers: her tuition fee from elementary and high school to university, accommodation, and a certain amount of money every month. Also, upon successful graduating from university with good grades, a well-paid job will be waiting for her. Jade couldn't be more grateful to God for answering her prayers and to Williams for helping her succeed. With her bags fully packed immediately, she bid her auntie and Ella farewell and promised to check up on them whenever she could afford it. Even though they mistreated her, she told herself, "I have promised not to allow their attitude towards me to reshape my life and future." She closed her eyes as they drove past her auntie's house, remembering her late mother's words and wishing both her parents were here to share in her joy.